Hello, everyone, and welcome to your Ruby live event. My name is Chef Ken Rubin. I'm the Chief Culinary Officer here at Ruby Online Culinary School. We have office hours today, which means you can bring any questions you like to the table so I can answer them live here during this event. So if you're new to our platform, it's a pretty simple process. All you need to do is type in the question that you have right to the top right hand in that question box where you can click that black add button. That puts it into a moderation queue so we can have a quick look at it before we get to it. So given that this is office hours, we have students from a variety of different courses. We'll be addressing any culinary related topic that is in the plant-based space or the non-plant-based space. Any questions around cooking technique or method or ingredients are all appreciated. If we can't get to your question, if it's something that's very, very personal or something that I feel would be better suited as an individual response, please understand that as well. And we also hope to get through all the questions today. It looks like there's quite a few already. So without further ado, we're just going to jump right in. And if you do see a question that you like, you can actually click on the little heart next to it. That will bump it up so we get to it just a little bit faster. So that will help in terms of the priority for some of these Q&A. But without further ado, let's just jump right in. I think there's some really excellent questions here, just given the quick glance that I've already given. So first question here is from Rebecca. What is the best way to maximize the lifespan of a head of celery? Store wrapped in plastic with a damp towel and foil, standing upright. Does it apply to other produce? So really important question. I think the larger question around what to do with produce, how to keep it at its peak, how to keep it most fresh after you purchased it. It's just a really critical topic. It's a topic that can make your food taste better and bring more life to your dishes, and also have the reduction of waste. The ability to extend out the shelf life for some of these products so that you don't go to the store or the farmer's market and then come back and a day later the food is not edible anymore. So when it comes to something like celery, celery is actually very forgiving compared to many other vegetables. It's actually pretty durable. But when it comes to something like celery, I'd recommend if you have the ability to keep it wrapped, something in a loose plastic bag, maybe with a towel around it. That's plenty just to maintain that moisture. You don't want to have it partially wrapped or having the tops exposed. That will all cause some drying or some disproportionate drying. I wouldn't say you need to put foil around it. That's not going to do a lot. If anything, if you just wanted to wrap it loosely in a towel and then in a plastic bag, that would work really well. I do see some people putting celery and things like that, other kind of stalk-like vegetables in water to, help it become, more alive feeling if it's in the fridge for a few weeks and it just kind of loses some of its power. You want to, kind of plump it up a little bit, and water will certainly help do that. It does apply to other types of produce. I say a similar thing can be done in terms of re-energizing celery. Can be done with some fresh herbs. It's how I will sometimes take some parsley or cilantro that's looking a little bit tired, put it in a jar upright, let those roots begin to pull in some of that water, kind of spark them up a little bit. Next question is actually related. I keep cut fresh herbs such as parsley and cilantro standing upright in a jar. Here we go. Covered in a plastic bag. Is there a better way? So Rebecca, that's a pretty good way to store many herbs. I would say another thing to consider within that is, some people will take a light, clean cloth towel and sometimes also use that to wrap the tops of those more delicate herbs. It really just depends on placement in your refrigerator, how cold your refrigerator is. All these sorts of things could diminish the life of some of those herbs. If it's too cold in particular, it could impact. I find that the method that you described in certain times of year when it's not too hot in my home will actually work for the countertop as well, just depending on how quickly I intend to use those herbs. But overall, that's a pretty good method. That's a method that allows the greenery and those herbs to have some life to them, but also still gives them a way to breathe and not become overly soggy. That's the other side of this, is you don't want to have too much moisture, too much liquid that accumulates or sits, which could essentially cause those leaves and even some of the finer stalks to become more degraded. And then, as that breaks down, the liquid that kind of happens from that becomes, just not something you want to be eating. So hopefully that helps, Rebecca. Next question here, learning to cook whole food plant-based in the Forks Over Knives course, what kind of recipes are best suited to being prepared in bulk and frozen in individual portions? Are there ingredients to avoid? I don't think there's necessarily, ingredients that you should avoid. I would say overall, the foods that tend to do the best, I find, with bulk preparation tends to be things like soups and stews and broths, things that have a basis through moist heat cooking techniques, because you've already cooked it. It's cooked or partially cooked. It's in a liquid or cooked by liquid, and when you freeze it and thaw it and reheat it, you're not going to have any real difference, or you're not going to have issues around texture suffering. Certain things, like if I roast vegetables, let's say, and I freeze those and then thaw those, upon thawing, you'll lose all the crispiness and crunchiness and the texture that you would have achieved through that dry heat cooking technique. So it might taste good, but it's not going to have the same aesthetic appeal. So things that are cooked, using moist heat cooking techniques, so grains, beans, soups, stews, braises, those are all things that I would prepare and then portion into, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 servings, not 12 servings or 18 servings, but some small number of servings. And that way, when you want to have a meal, you want to make a quick lunch, you want to put something in the fridge overnight to thaw, that you're not thawing some enormous container, some huge mass, huge brick of ice, basically. So the thing with that is, planning ahead a little bit, knowing that if you make a big batch of, 3-bean chili or, some pilaf or some other dish, that you're kind of planning and saying, great, I've got some for tonight for the main meal, maybe some to put away as a leftover, but because I have so much, I want to freeze some, and I'm going to freeze these 2 portions or these 4 portions. In terms of other things just to avoid, I don't generally do a lot of freezing of vegetables that are completely raw. So I like to par-cook vegetables if I intend to freeze them and use them as whole ingredients. So something that I'll do is if I have, let's just say, for instance, a whole, some large amount of butternut squash or some other thing, I might prepare that in a few different ways, puree some, maybe roast some, and then, I can freeze those in portions knowing that I might turn it into a soup or a dip or add it to some other thing at some later date. But I'm not just going to necessarily take butternut squash and just cut it up raw and then freeze it and then figure out what to do with it. I find that it's just so much more useful in most cases to kind of do something with it first. So blanch those green beans or do some preparation, some light preparation even. Next question from Suzanne. Why do people lump white potatoes with white rice and white bread and think they are bad for you? White potatoes are a whole food, and I think they're only unhealthy if you add lots of oil or butter to them. Am I missing something? So it's a great question. I think there's a lot of things embedded in the question. I think, number one, white potatoes get lumped together with those foods because the vast majority of white potatoes in North America are consumed in French fries in very unhealthy format where there's no peel, no skin, and the cooking technique is a deep fried cooking technique. So while I think there's a lot of health benefits to eating a whole white potato, certainly when you compare it to other root vegetables and even other types of potatoes, it doesn't have quite the nutrient density, the nutritional potency of some of those other products. Now, certainly, if you just take white potatoes and don't fry them or don't lather them with too much oil or butter, and you treat them well, I think certainly, and you're eating the skin, then certainly I think there's a lot to be had for enjoying those potatoes. Again, with other types of foods, not as your singular food. I also really firmly categorize them as starches, right? They're not vegetables. They're not in the category of anything green leafy or anything that would be cruciferous or anything of those sorts of things. So it is primarily starch. And while, certainly not bad, like if it were just turned into French fries, again, it's not going to have the potency or the powerhouse nature of so many other different types of vegetables. So I don't have any problems with white potatoes. I think they need to be, consumed in those other ways outside of the way that I think, 80 or 90% of them are, which is in that French fry format. So, a lot of those recommendations and pieces of guidance really kind of point towards that. Is they don't want to say, yeah, go ahead and eat all the white potatoes you want, because then people misinterpret that as eating them in any form, whether they're peeled or deep fried or cooked, with loads of additional fats. Next question coming in here from Brenda. I'm having a hard time on how to start a plant-based way of life. We get this question a lot. I eat beef, chicken, pork, etc., and I know plant-based will be better for my health. I'm struggling with how to get started. I think, Brenda, the answer in terms of how to get started is going to be very, very personal for you. There's a lot of different ways that people get started in terms of what's motivating them. You've already identified that that your health will likely improve if you change your diet, and it has to be that internal, self-motivating piece that kind of keeps you interested and keeps you moving. So in terms of starting points, I would say, some people start by reducing consumption of animal products and making substitutions and modifying recipes. And, their way in is by finding ways to really begin to appreciate more the addition of more plant-based foods, of learning to cook and eat new foods that maybe you haven't experienced before, or maybe you haven't experienced in many, many years. And it's through the inclusion of those new things that you begin to say, wow, yeah, there are some things I can really eat. Other people do better kind of with a straight break, a direct, what we call like a cold turkey based approach, where they made up their mind, they made a choice, and they have to go all in. They're not going to be back and forth. They're not going to be teetering between the two, because they feel like they might not be able to commit, or they can't be all in. And that's just the way some people are wired, and that's just another approach. I find most people do need to step into it, find their areas where they know they can cook great foods, where they get satisfied. And then it's not the end of the world if they backtrack and start eating some of those foods again, or if they eat them on occasion, or whatever it might be. So a lot of it really, I think, depends on you, what you are looking for, what your timing looks like, your own sense of urgency around your health. If you are just trying to be more preventative and feel better, or if you're really trying to address some specific health concern. Those would all be factors that I think might guide how you step into it. But there's really no right or wrong way. I've seen people become very successful using a variety of approaches, and there's no one correct way. We don't want to ever say this is the way you do it, and if you do it this way, you're going to be 100% successful. It's just not the way it is. So for me, a lot of it comes down to planning and organizing, ultimately. So whether you just kind of take a step in, or you go more kind of all in, planning, organizing, making sure you have things to eat that you like. That's a very practical way. If you're not eating and you're hungry, you're going to make bad decisions. So it's those sorts of things that I think ultimately are going to help you be more successful. With so much of what we do at Ruby, it's getting to those base behaviors of what drives that success. So it's why we focus so much on cooking skills, because for us, we feel that even if you know what to eat or how to eat or what foods you should eat, what ingredients to incorporate, that doesn't translate to behavior change. So we focus on that cooking part because once you've made a decision, we want you to be able to exercise and act on your decision by having those skills, those, the ability to do those things that actually make the food happen, the holding the knife, the using the pan, combining ingredients, really understanding how to shop, understanding for yourself what you like and what you don't like. That way you can build a menu set that you really like. That's not someone else's idea that you think you should like. So that's a big piece of it too, is there's a lot of food out there in the world, and they're not all gonna taste good to you. So move on, find something else. There's a lot of great flavors out there, and just kind of stick with those. Next question here from Philip. I'm trying to do the no oil sauteing, but I don't think I have the right pans. Is there a chance I'm doing it wrong? Is there any chance you could give me some tricks of the trade? So, Philip, I would say, when it comes to the no oil saute, it does take some practice. I find that I get my best results using a 12-inch stainless steel pan, and having a small amount of vegetable stock, or even water if you don't have any vegetable stock, on hand when you're working with that no oil saute is going to be really, really important. So, first thing is really understanding pan temperature. That's going to be critical. It's why I like the stainless steel pan to use, because you can get the pan quite hot. You don't have to worry about anything that you might worry about with a non-stick or a coated type pan, where there might be some recommendations not to heat the pan very much or to a certain temperature. So I like stainless because there's ultimately a higher threshold, but there's no risk of really damaging your pan during regular cooking conditions. So really it's about getting that pan nice and hot. It's about adding those ingredients, say your onion, your zucchini, your bell pepper pieces, whatever it might be, adding those to the pan, not crowding that pan. So you're not looking at having, lots of vegetables stacking on top of each other. You want to make sure it's even level surface, that you don't have, vegetables that aren't receiving some of that surface contact. That's a really important part, is the veggies in there. You want to have that direct contact with the pan so you get conductive heat transfer and caramelization and color as a result. Making sure the heat is right is kind of step one. Making sure that you're applying proper movement so that you're not letting that food stick to the pan or get burnt to the pan, but rather applying movement or the addition of small amounts of that flavorful stock or water or other liquid. Applying that very much in that essence of just enough to let it release and lift off the pan, but without creating a lot of excess moisture. You're not trying to add the moisture into the pan so you can then simmer it or steam it. You're just trying to, at this step, flash the pan, create enough of a moisture contact so it releases from the bottom of the pan and allows you to continue to move it around. Other sorts of things that are potentially easier to burn, like garlic in particular, you're going to want to add farther along in your cooking process so you have less chance of direct heat, direct contact with a chunk of garlic in the bottom of that pan. And that burns, that can cause some really strong off flavors. So trying to avoid that is also going to be really important. But Philip, I'll say that it takes some practice. Oil makes it easy when you're cooking. So when you take the oil out of a saute, there are those other kind of visual things and auditory things that you have to clue into, so that when you hear the pan, you can hear different kind of sizzle. When you flash it, you can hear the amount of evaporative power it has and these sorts of things. So hopefully that helps you, Philip. Terry asks, how uh, do I tell when a nonstick pan is hot enough to dry saute? That's a great question. The water test in the nonstick pan doesn't work quite the same because of the surface and the nature of the surface and how that small bead of water would hover above the surface. So if you haven't seen that water test video with the the kind of that nonstick effect, that's worth going back in your course or courses and checking that out. But nonstick pans are going to be a little bit different. I would say many of them don't want to be heated quite as hot as a stainless pan, but you also don't have that requirement because you're working in a nonstick context where you have a little bit more wiggle room in terms of your temperature. So you can achieve some of the same browning and some of the same effects in a nonstick pan without getting to that pan temperature that you would need in a stainless pan. And that temperature is fairly high. You're looking at between about 385 Fahrenheit all the way up to about 300 or 420 or so degrees Fahrenheit, in that range. So 400, give or take, 15 degrees ish is what you're looking for when you're heating that pan for your dry saute. Again, stainless is going to work at that higher temperature. A nonstick, you can get away with using a lower temperature because of the nature of that surface. Elena asks, hi chef, what is your opinion on bagged lettuce mixes and other bagged greens? Do you use them? Do you recommend them? Do you wash them even though they say triple washed? Thanks. Loving my forks over knives course, learning so much. Elena, well, thank you first and foremost. We're really thrilled that you're loving the course and that everything's going well for you, through your learning online. When it comes to these bags of lettuces and bags of greens, it's a product that I have used, I do use. I find that compared to other types of lettuces and other types of greens, while they're delicate and they're pretty, in many cases they don't have quite the flavor, the depth of flavor as I'm looking for that you might get in more mature, more farther along products. But I see the appeal of them. They're very convenient, they're tender, they're light, they're easy to eat, they're easy to portion. So if they help you eat more greens and more vegetables, then 100% I would endorse you doing so, and I want to recommend and help you do that even better. But I'll start with that I think that there are lots of other ways to still get those veggies. But if you want to go the direction of these bagged greens for convenience, for all those other reasons, part of it is I think that they're washed, they're handled well on premise. If they come to you and you don't have a lot of time lag between, the time they literally get off the truck, delivered to the store where you buy them, and the time that you purchase them and eat them, you're probably okay. I find that over handling those small greens can actually detract from their quality on some level. Now, if you get those greens and they don't seem super pristine and you feel like you pull out some leaves that are not in tip-top form, then certainly go ahead and I would just rewash all those greens, gently, using kind of a salad spinner or some kind of a colander type thing, and just be cautious, be a little bit easy-handed on those, so you don't want to damage or bruise or create any issues with those greens. They can be easily kind of torn or bruised and those sorts of things. So I wouldn't necessarily be compelled to wash them, but if you feel that they should be washed, then wash them. The other side of the equation with some of those greens is that there have been some limited number of recalls based on foodborne illness based on bagged greens being contaminated. And of course, this has nothing to do with the greens themselves. It has everything to do with the way these greens are washed and packaged and sent into mass distribution. So in other words, if you have greens coming out of a big farming operation and they're being washed in big batches, and one of those batches has some foodborne illness and those all get bagged up, then you have foodborne illness being potentially spread via that same washing bin or whatever that mechanism might be to lots and lots of bags that then get distributed all over the country. So that's the only risk and why I recommend washing them potentially, but in many cases, it's a very, very safe food. Next question from Sophia here. Hi, Chef Ken. Thank you for the opportunity to ask you a few questions. What did you enjoy best about your culinary education experience? Was there any challenge in your process of learning? Oh gosh, Sophia, that's a really interesting question. My culinary education is still ongoing. So I have had a life full of culinary education. I've been very fortunate to have in my life lots of great teachers and mentors and chefs that I've worked with. So I've enjoyed every part of my education, learning to cook, whether it was formal education that I received in the kitchen or more on the job type education, or even my academic education and training in the food space. For me, it's just so multifaceted. It's so dynamic. It's really about embracing all those different elements and being very open to learning new things. I think one of the shortcomings of kind of the way a lot of education happens and a lot of the professional type of education that I've seen is that it sets it up like with an expectation that if you go to school and you spend a year or 2 or 4 and you do these things, then you just become set up to do this job. And I think that while that's true on one hand, there's really a lot more to be said about receiving some education that sets you up for a lifelong path of learning, that really creates in you the foundation to continue to grow and to realize that whatever education you might be in right now at some beginning stage, it's just the very beginning, and it's going to be the framework or the structure for learning throughout your life. And one of the things I always share with students that it's really more important right now when you're engaging with whatever learning platform, Ruby or something on ground or some other mix of learning, that it's really important that whatever it is you do, that it becomes expansive for you, that it becomes something that you can build upon and grow with, and not something that puts you into a certain box or creates a false sense of knowing everything that you need to know, because the world of food is really huge. And for those of us who have been in it for 20 or 30 years plus, we realize that the reality of the food world is that it's so large and there's so many things to learn that the more you know, the more you realize that you really know very, very little. That every cuisine, every ingredient has long history, long ways to interpret, understand, and to appreciate these different foods and these different practices. So you can get very much absorbed in the food space and spend an entire lifetime in multiple careers engaging in it, which is very, very fun. Next question here. Hi, Chef. Have you heard any new guidelines when it comes to washing fruits and vegetables since COVID? Do you wash and prep them before putting them in the fridge, or just wash and keep them whole? What do you think are safe practices? I think what's fascinating in many respects about COVID is certainly it did create new urgency and a lot of new awareness around food handling and safe handling of ingredients and takeout, and an awareness around washing your hands and hygiene and these sorts of things. But in many ways, the rules have been very consistent. So the Model Food Code or ServSafe or HACCP principles, all these kind of underlying or conceptual type approaches to food safety, all very much follow the same basic ideas. It's about keeping your hands clean. It's about employees who are sick not coming to work, not handling food. It's about the safe handling of product throughout the life cycle of that food. So when you think about ingredient handling or how to work with produce in this case. How does that come into if you're a restaurant, into your back door, if through receiving, and make it into your walk-ins. If you're at home, how does it come into your house, or how do you shop for it? How do you receive it? Everything along the way has an impact in terms of potential safety. So when it comes down to it, we still don't have any known COVID transmission through food handling. Certainly there's COVID transmission through people at restaurants eating food and sharing food, but that's primarily through aerosol transmission by being in the same space, not because a person who had COVID was preparing a salad that you then ate, and then you got the COVID from the salad. So that's the good news. But the rules, I would say, by and large, are intact. And a lot of the things that we know about things like COVID or other coronaviruses is that they are killed during cooking, and it doesn't take a lot of a temperature threshold to kill the virus itself. Also killed during regular cleaning and sanitizing processes. So regular surface cleaning and cleaning of small wares, warewashing, and so on, by its very nature, is going to kill that virus. And that's not because of anything new we're doing, but just the nature of the soaps and the sanitizers that we've always used. So I'd say by and large, I would stick to what you're doing. That's the standard safe practices. I would say nothing really in addition for COVID, unless you're working with populations where you're directly responsible for packaging food or for handing food to someone. In those cases, you just want to be extra cautious that you're using gloves and face masks and such, that you're not coughing or sneezing or anything like that on that product directly. Those would be the primary issues. Great question, though. Next question here from Sammy. Dear Ken, my assignment to create white stock, I followed all the steps according to the final stage, was super clear stock and tasty, but unfortunately did not get any gelatin to present it for my assignment. What went wrong, so I can avoid it my second time? So this sounds like, Sammy, you are in our Pro Cook certification class course, trying to do the white stock assignment, making a stock using chicken. And it sounds like in this case your extraction maybe wasn't long enough. So I would recommend simmering for a longer period of time, and or increasing the volume, the ratio of the chicken bones in that recipe, so you can achieve your desired outcome on that stock activity. Next question from Mary. Any favorite recipes for zucchini, the gift that keeps on giving, or any spice blends to use when sauteing them? Current garden count is 8 in the fridge and about 10 in the garden. I don't want to throw them out. So, Mary, I wish you could see my kitchen counter. I've got a few overgrown zucchini that were hiding under the large zucchini leaves. So we have some extra zucchini now. We're also working on getting through all these various zucchini products. So, one thing that you can do, just in terms of, if you want to process a lot and get rid of volume, one thing that you can do is just, cube and roast the zucchini. And that's something that you can then freeze. And upon thawing, again, it's not going to have the same texture as a roasted zucchini piece, but it's certainly something you can then puree or add into a soup or a stew to finish it. For me, I use those pieces just in a mixed rice and grain bowl, just as kind of a quick lunch. Even just knowing that it's already cooked, I don't even have to reheat it. It's just cooked and cooled. A lot of people like to make zucchini bread, zucchini muffins. My wife actually at one point, maybe 2 weeks ago, was making these oven-baked zucchini croquettes, these little zucchini fritters that were bound with some breadcrumb and had some herbs and actually quite a bit of chili in them. And these are just very small, like 1-inch little croquettes that were oven baked at a high temperature, so they got crispy and kind of held together. That's a delicious way. I would say for me, when the zucchini gets to be a little bit larger and less tender, I've had some really good success in cutting those into big rounds and braising them. So, imagine your long zucchini, you cut it into big discs, big rounds. You can sear those and create some color, and then cook them in a pan very low and slow with lots of aromatics and some vegetable stock. And they become, just completely soft and still intact whole, because the skin is going to keep them. And they're beautiful. You can then cut them up to become center of the plate. You can sauce them. You can use them for whatever you like. You can just even chop them up and put them with whatever rice or beans or grains or pastas that you're eating. Another way to use zucchini is in purees. So there's a really great salsa verde that I make. That's a tomatillo base, but also includes whole cooked zucchini and onions, and that just fills out the basis, kind of the texture of that dish. So a lot of opportunities, but I definitely feel your pain and your struggle, based on the amount of zucchini that you have coming in. I'm right there with you. Thank you, Chef Rubin. Regarding dried herbs and spices, what's the best way to purchase them? In bulk or package, store them in a glass or plastic or original packaging, and for how long? I would say a lot of the guidelines that exist around spices really has to do with how quickly you can get through them. So I try to buy spices in bulk because I go through a lot of spices, but then I have the issue of having too much. So for me, it always comes down to having kind of a primary place where I can store my bulk spices, which is for me in my basement. I have some large bins that have smaller containers, but then in my primary cooking area, I have smaller containers that are going to be more exposed to sunlight, more exposed to air, opening and closing, more exposed to heat because of its proximity to where I'm cooking and preparing food. I would say overall, if you can keep it in the original container, that's great. I like to store my spices in glass containers and out of sunlight. So whether it's a cabinet or a cupboard that's keeping the light off, or it's the dark color glass, a brown or a blue glass would also work. But really, it's just about understanding the spices that you go through a lot, sourcing them well. One trick that I always do is when I buy spices, I just take a Sharpie, a pen, and on my label, just write the label, on the label the date. That way I know, oh, hey, this was actually from last September. Okay, well, that's getting to be old. For me, the lifespan of spices depends on the spice, and if it's ground, it also depends on how old it was when it got to you in the first place. So sometimes spices can sit on the shelf at the store for weeks or months or longer before you even get it. So it's not just how long has it been in your possession, but how long has it been out there? When was it packaged? So buying spices from a reputable supplier is going to be very, very important for that reason. But by and large, I would say if you're talking about dried herbs, those don't have nearly the shelf life as dried spices. So maybe 60 days, 90 days, a few months, depending on what that herb is. Whole dried spices can last many months or even years, whereas ground spices, I feel like, have a life in that 60, 90 days, maybe 6 months, depending on the spice. Other than that, you can still use them, but it's not going to have the potency, the vibrancy, the that kind of vital essence, the vital flavor of those ingredients. Next question here about hummus. When making hummus from dried chickpeas, what are the pros and cons of removing their skins by cooking with baking soda? Does the skin contain fiber and other nutrition? Yeah, Rebecca, it's a great question. I have been making hummus for the better part of 30 years and have cooked it many different ways. When I'm just wanting to get something done quickly and just hummus for hummus sake. Um, I'll use the whole chickpea. I'll make my chickpeas in a pressure cooker. I won't go through the process of taking the skins off and having that alkaline wash. And I'll just puree and I'm fine. It's great, great hummus. When I am taking extra time and making a really maybe more formal meal or nicer meal, or I have an extra bit of time, say I'm making my own fresh stuffed dolmas, or I'm making my own fresh pita bread, no, I'm going to stop and make the extra effort to make that hummus kind of a more luxurious style. And in that case, taking the skins off does yield a final texture that is incredibly silky and smooth and just delightful. And I've had both ways my whole life. I would say the nutrition that you're losing is largely going to be, because it's that exterior husk piece, it's largely going to be that insoluble fiber from the beans, from the chickpea outside. For a lot of people otherwise eating a ton of plant-based, there's not typically a shortage in insoluble fiber. So I would say for most people, it's not going to be a big issue. If hummus is your primary legume that you eat, it's the way you get your beans, then I would say probably better to have that in there. It's going to be important for your overall fiber for your day. But if it's just one of the things that you do, your body's not going to miss it otherwise. I think it's perfectly fine. So I wouldn't overly worry about the removing of the exterior for a strong nutritional case. Next question: for hot or cold soups calling for dairy, like yogurt, sour cream, or creme fraiche, is there a good plant-based substitute? Gosh, 100%. So my go-to in this sort of a scenario would be some sort of a cashew-based sour cream. So there's a lot of different ways to make this. You can actually just blend cashews and make a acidified lemon or vinegar flavored type cashew base. You can also actually blend the cashews and ferment them yourself and make a properly kind of fermented cashew cream sauce, which could be used as a fill-in, a stand-in, like a dollop on top. Or if you're looking for a creamy consistency, that can be blended in or stirred in and used to add body or thickness or that kind of a dynamic as well. I would say that when it comes to the richness, cashew cream is very, very rich in terms of calories, in terms of its ability to thicken something. So once you go down the road of, hey, I want to add this cashew cream to thicken a soup, my only word of advice or caution would be really start with just a small amount and stir it in, and then bring that liquid back to a simmer, and then give it just a minute, because that is when you're going to have a much better indication of its thickening power versus just stirring it in and turning it off. It's really after it hit that simmering point when the cashew itself will begin to take on this incredible thickening and kind of addition to the creaminess factor, which is great. But the guidance there is just to start with a small amount because you'll be very surprised how too much cashew cream as a dairy replacement can overwhelm a dish and make a sauce turn gummy or just very, very heavy very quickly once heat is applied to it. Next question: I am making Thai red curry paste. What can I substitute for shrimp paste? Would the fishless fish sauce be a good choice? Yeah, I would say that that's a good starting point. It's going to have a lot of those umami and oceanic type flavors, I would say, mushroom and seaweed and those sorts of deep flavors. So I would say give it a good shot. Taste it before you just add it, so for yourself that you can always add that flavor, but once it's in there, you can't take it out. So my only caution would be, you know, build that dish, and then when you're looking to finish it or to kind of put those finishing touches, add that fish sauce to it for that oceanic umami kind of layer. That's what's going to be really helpful. Next question, my baking sheets have brown rust and black marks. I can't get them fully clean, removed. They're supposed to be dishwasher safe, but when I remove them from the machine, the black and some brown rub off on paper towels. Should they? You know, it sounds like, Jill, maybe you need to get some new sheet pans. Sometimes they claim that they're dishwasher safe, but it sounds like yours are rusting. So, you know, it's going to be something that you're going to be dealing with, and, you know, could get into your food and things like this. So, you know, you might do yourself a favor. It's a pretty small investment to get some new sheet pans. You know, buy some stainless steel sheet pans. They're not going to have those issues. They're going to be beautiful. You're going to spend more of your time cooking and less of your time cleaning. So hopefully that helps you. How do I clean stainless steel cookware with tarnish and white spots? Is it safe to cook and wash with them if I can't remove? Yeah, absolutely. So if you have some small spots and things like that with your stainless steel cookware, you know, a few things you can do. Number one, you can get like a scouring pad, and, you know, just with some old-fashioned elbow grease, some good scrubbing and some soap, you can certainly get all those different things off. We've had many Ruby students recommend a product called Barkeeper's Friend, which is has a slight kind of abrasive quality to it, but that will also, when used in tandem with a sponge, you know, a good vigorous kind of circular motion on the surface of your pan will do wonders for reclaiming that surface. Kind of take everything off, and just put it back down to that stainless steel surface. So those are just two ideas. I would say that if you can't remove them or just don't want to take that extra effort, that there's certainly nothing about it that will make you sick. It's just a matter of, you know, if you want to have your pans looking nice and new without those spots. Next question here. Roasted peppers following two different recipes and temperatures. First was 500 degrees, whole charred below skin. Is that normal? Second, 400 degrees, split mini bell, oil, burned edges, skin didn't separate. Is the char browning okay to eat or a health issue? So, gosh, you know, there are a lot of different ways to roast peppers. You know, one would be just in a hot oven on a pan, you know, oil or no oil, but making sure that you're turning it around. 500 might be a little bit hot, 400 might be a little bit cold, maybe something in the middle would be good. Another way that people do it is they take long tongs, and if you have a gas range, people just take those tongs and hold the pepper and just directly over the fire toast it. You know, the skin will blister and blacken, and then you want to put that into a container so it can steam. It's in that steaming process that the skin separates from the flesh, from kind of the main portion of the pepper. But if it's you know, very, very charred, if it's charred below the skin, that's a good indication you've applied too much heat for too much time. But the whole point of this is to take the skin off, to add a slight smoky element, and to soften the dish, you know, the peppers, but not to. The point of it is not to eat the char. The point of it is to get the skin charred, and then the skin gets removed, leaving behind some of that nice smoky flavor beyond the pepper flavor. So it sounds like you might do a combination of those two things. Maybe 450. Make sure you're turning it around a lot. Otherwise, on a grill or over a burner directly with you know, good pair of tongs and your vent hood on is going to be useful. Laura says, I have an abundant harvest of collard greens. I've been braising them whole food plant-based with sweet onions, smoked paprika, aminos, yet the bitterness prevails. Have you any suggestions to combat the bitterness within the plant-based realm? I would say, one thing you can do when it comes to these greens is, really caramelize those sweet onions. So I love collard greens and I love the smokiness of smoked paprika. The one thing I'll do is I'll take a lot of onion, maybe 2 onions for every 2 heads of collard greens when I'm cooking. So it's kind of a lot of onions. And I'll actually cook those down fairly well. I want to get those actually caramelized and browned. And when they're at that caramelized state and the brownness is there, that's going to add a lot of additional sweetness. If you want to have even more sweetness, I would say add some date paste to that, or some carrots or some other sweet vegetables. Sometimes I'll add, during the season, sweet potato pieces or other sweet vegetables that don't become part of the overall matrix, but in every bite you get a small amount of sweetness. So that could be very useful as well. In terms of bitterness, I think that the elements of sweetness is going to be your best way to counterbalance that. The other thing could be, the collard greens themselves, depending on how long you cook them, could also vary based on that bitterness. So I like my collards to be actually not quite so cooked, not that super long, slow braise. I like them to be a little bit more together, but it's certainly cooking them longer will help remove some of that bitterness if that's a caution for you. Next question here. What are the go-to ingredients for custom seasonings for burgers or steak? New students, mom and son cooking for family. Mom is a vegetarian and cannot test the meat. I would say this just varies greatly depending on your preferences. I would say, starting with salt and pepper is a good thing. Otherwise, if there are certain seasoning blends or mixes that you like, those might be good things to use. For me, it's always a matter of going back to what are those things that you prefer? What are those flavor sets that as a family or as an individual you like? So do you like onion and garlic? Do you like fresh herbs? Do you like citrus? Do you like black pepper? What are those things that you're going to like? Next question here from Nancy. What would you use as a xanthan gum replacement if you don't have it on hand? Gosh, Nancy, that so very much depends on what recipe or application you're using that xanthan gum in. Things that might come to mind that you might use would be something like a guar gum or any other sort of starch, perhaps. But without knowing the specific recipe, it would be hard to know what kind of replacement you might have. In many cases, xanthan is doing something very specific, and a small amount is being used for a textural component in a dish or in a baked good. So it really just depends on your specific application, but likely something like guar or a starch of some sort. You said powerhouse in regard to white potatoes not fitting into the category. I've been taught that potatoes in particular are super powerhouse providers of long-lasting nutrition because of the long chains of sugar molecules making up the chemistry. Yeah, Perry, certainly from a carbohydrate perspective, they're great, but they're just not going to have the long range of other micronutrients that cruciferous vegetables or green leafy vegetables or other sorts of root vegetables will have. Again, they're not devoid of nutrition. I'm not claiming that. When I compare them side by side to other vegetables, certainly they have the carbohydrate, and that's great, but they're not giving you the wide range of the other phytochemicals and the other micronutrients that you would see in lots of other foods. So they're an easy food to eat, they're a delicious food to eat, but my point was more to say there's lots of other tubers and root vegetables that you should and could enjoy in addition to those plain white potatoes. Excellent session, Ken. Note to anyone reading that while potatoes are starchy vegetables, like all whole starchy vegetables, they're actually nutritious and they aren't particularly dense in calories, less than 1 calorie per gram. Yes, so still, I'll say again, they're primarily providing that carbohydrate for you. So when I look towards all the foods that we can be eating, it's not just carbohydrates that I'm looking at. It's all the other phytonutrients and micronutrients that become important as part of this conversation. Hi, Ken. According to many recipes, I start with searing the meat for browning, but I rub meat first with a spice mixture. It seems to me that until the meat gets brown, the spices can be burned. Yeah, this would apply really to the exterior application of spices on anything that you're preparing, whether it's meat or vegetables or anything else. I would say that many spices on the exterior, when they're exposed to hot, dry heat, can burn and can create off flavors. So certainly you want to be mindful of what spices you're using, and also mindful of the time and the temperature that you're applying to those products. Next question here. Hi, Ken. What can I make a vegan pie crust with without using biscuits? One that would be good for cheesecakes and other sweet pies. One suggestion would be ground nuts or ground seeds. I make a really amazing crust using ground pecans that's held together with just a small amount of date paste, and the oil from the pecans is very delicious and creates a really nice flavor. It doesn't really work the same way as a traditional cookie crust or a pie dough type crust, but certainly creates a nice layer of texture and something that when you cut into it is a base to use as a crust of sorts. So that would be a suggestion. It's not a light crust by any means. It is made of nuts and has sweetness from fruit paste, but that would be one suggestion. Next question here. I don't have a stainless steel tossing pan. Mine is a nonstick, but otherwise looks like the pan in the demonstration video for pan tossing. Is it possible to get the same caramelization in a nonstick, or should I get a new stainless steel pan? Maria, I would say both. So you can still achieve really great results using a nonstick pan, but I would just highly encourage you to get a good stainless steel pan. If you're committed to cooking, you're committed to cooking with less or without oil, it's just going to be a really great thing in your kitchen to have for a variety of reasons. You can even roast vegetables in a stainless steel pan. I'll oftentimes just take a bunch of Brussels sprouts, and I already have a sheet pan of something going, and just take a bunch of Brussels sprouts and put them into a small pan and just make that a small side dish just on its own. Just roasting in a small stainless steel pan versus on a sheet pan. So very versatile tool is what I'm getting at. Next question, can you share your thoughts on pea protein versus wheat gluten, difference in terms of nutrition and taste? Oh gosh, both are going to be very high in protein. I'm not sure the exact numbers, protein by weight. Both are very, very high because of the nature of the product. In terms of gluten and flavor, I would say that's going to be, just a lot more neutral in terms of flavor. The pea protein flavors, many of them have still a beaniness, kind of a bean-ish flavor, depending on how the protein's being extracted or isolated. Some don't. Some are more processed and so on. But I would say that in terms of use, they're very, very distinct. Both will provide protein. Gluten provides protein as well as that structure, that interlaced gluten structure that becomes really essential in baked goods and other things. So gluten's going to add stretch, it's going to add texture, it's going to add the ability for things in a baked good to have lift within a pocket of air. So think about bread and the structure of bread, or the stretchiness of a pasta noodle that still holds together. That's going to be kind of indicative of a pea protein or a gluten, type of a situation, whereas pea protein is going to add protein that will be thickening and not create that same network from a structural component. So hopefully that helps. They have different applications in terms of foods. In the recipe for vegetable stock, it calls for leeks using the white and green parts. Are they talking about the dark green part? In the past, I have thrown this part away. Since it is sold by the pound, it seems like a waste. Thanks. So yeah, when it comes to leeks and using leeks in stock, I would say that, when you're cooking with leeks in a recipe, you're using the white and then just a very, very light green part, towards the bottom. When it comes to stock making, you're going to want to wash the leeks and wash all the greens, and except maybe for the very, very tippy tops of those greens that could be kind of leathery and beat up, you can use the majority of the green part of that leek. That's going to add a lot of flavor. I wouldn't throw it away. That's going to be, I think, something important for you when you're building those bags of stock making veggies and things that, those leek tops, again, cleaned, because they could be full of sand and mud, are going to be perfectly fine to add to your stock making. Kaylee asks, what sort of whole food plant-based products or services do you think are lacking in today's society that would make a diet, lifestyle, and related knowledge more accessible and attainable to the general population? Oh gosh, Kaylee, that is a amazing question, one that I think about all the time. I think that, I'll start by saying, having been involved with and been observing this plant-based world for myself now for about 30 years, I've never been more excited by the amount of innovation, investment, just by the amount of brain power in this space right now. There's so many amazingly smart and innovative and creative people working in this space, and working from a variety of angles. Some people really focusing on health and wellness first and foremost, others looking at issues around climate or the environment or sustainability or food waste, some looking at animal welfare and compassion towards animals. So there's so many ways into this world, and I think a lot of that helps govern or helps create the context or the framework for how people engage in that world. I think there's tremendous opportunity, in particular within plant-based, to do work from an intergenerational perspective. I think people always talk about, the movement and young people and this sort of, framework about what young people are doing and this sort of thing. But I think that there's, in fact, a larger story on the intergenerational side, the way that young people can impact their parents or their grandparents, and the way that the wisdom from our parents and grandparents can also inform on us how people used to eat, what food and sharing food, what that used to mean for people. So it's very much a two-way street. It's not something like the Zoomers teaching the Boomers, but it's really goes both ways. And I just see a lot of opportunity there for business, because both elements are tremendously effective levers for each other to work towards something that becomes greater than working alone. So I see that maybe as one area, that intergenerational piece. I also see, just from a very practical perspective, the need for increased in specialized media and content creation around plant-based, not just on the side of creating more content, more recipes, or more, things to give people, but really content around living and lifestyle and behavior, and things to do, things that are activity-based, things to share. It's those sorts of things that you do that I think ultimately become a lot more sticky and reproducible within your family. Next question coming in. This is a question about cooking eggs from Jesse. In regards to cooking methods, what methods would be used for cooking frittatas? So frittatas primarily use two techniques. They start with a dry cooking technique like a sweating or a sauteing to cook the initial ingredients. Say you're making a vegetable frittata. And then it goes to baking. So you will initially cook those, say, vegetables in the pan. Upon adding your eggs, that then becomes partially cooked, stovetop, and then baked. So those would be your primary two cooking methods with frittata, that initial dry heat cooking method and then that baking method. Next question here from Robert. Enjoying the Forks Over Knives class. Thanks to yourself and the other instructors. I recently saw a recipe for marinara sauce that required chopped tomatoes with the seeds removed. Is there a slick, easier way to remove seeds for fresh whole tomatoes? Yeah, there's some easy ways that you could use, using a sieve and using some other methods. I would say the best thing to do is not to worry so much about the tomato seeds. If you can buy, really great fresh tomatoes and, cut those in half and just, kind of give them a swipe with your fingers or a small spoon and take out those seeds manually, that's perfectly fine. There's all kinds of devices and tools and strainers and things that you could use that will help you manually extract the seeds. Short of having one of those things, I would just say don't sweat it too much. If you have beautiful tomatoes, a few of those seeds is not going to ruin the dish. What you're trying to do is just increase the overall amount of the kind of core tomato flesh flavor and reduce the seeds, which can in some cases be just a little bit bitter. But otherwise, if you're starting with great tomatoes, I would say, focus on that. Don't worry so much about getting 100% of those seeds out. Claire says, hi, thanks for holding these great office hours. Can you tell me if goat's milk contains casein? Yes, it does. All dairy products, all milk derived from animals contains that, 100%. Ethan asks, we have a lot of wild mustard greens. We'd like to use them now as well as preserve them for later use. Suggestions? Well, that's delicious. I would say, one thing you can do with those mustard greens is you can blanch them, wash them, blanch them quickly, and then take the moisture out, kind of squeeze it with your hands, take the moisture out, and put those into small individual containers and freeze it. I'll do that with my mustards and collard greens so that in the winter time or even going into the spring, I can go into my freezer and pull out a bag and add it to a soup or a stew or to finish something, and just to have really beautiful cooked greens just to go right in. That's delicious. In terms of preserving them, I would go online and find maybe some recipes for traditionally preserved mustard greens. Typically kind of a salt cured method is what I might recommend. If you have objections to the amount of salt in those, you'll probably want to find another method that leverages acid versus salt for that preservation method. But otherwise, preserved mustard greens are an amazing addition to soups and stews, to rice dishes. It's just a really wonderful flavor builder and a great way to eat mustard greens. So very, very delicious. Next question here from Natasha. Where do you buy your spices in bulk? I buy them from a variety of places. I would say one of my favorite places to buy specialty spices is from a store based in New York called Calustian's. It's on Lexington, I think in 26th or 27th. But it's a store when I was going to New York a few times a year, I would just shop there, whenever I was in the city. Now with COVID, I'm ordering spices online through Calustian's. I'm also a fan of a company called Savory Spice Shop. They're a company that happens to have a physical location shop in my neighborhood where I live in Portland, Oregon. But otherwise, they have an online presence. And one of the things I like about them is their spices, to me, have proven to be incredibly fresh. So buying spices from them has really been amazing because of just the pure freshness of some of their product that I just haven't seen before in a few other categories. Next question is from Vanessa. I am loving these open office hours and the thoroughness of the answers given. I wish to thank you all. Well, thank you for joining us. It's our pleasure. It's something that gives us just a lot of satisfaction helping our students. I recently cooked a complete meal using techniques and info I'd gained. It all came out perfect and at the same time, which is great progress for me. That's an amazing thing. I think that for many people, just making dinner happen, just getting it on the table, looking like dinner at the same time is a huge win in itself. For me, that's one of the things I've always maybe taken for granted around my cooking is, for those of us who've been cooking for so long, we have a natural internal clock that we know we can set, and we know the order of events. We know when we should start simmering something or when something can be turned off and just let to sit. We know the things that are going to be okay sitting for 5 minutes or 10 minutes versus things that are okay sitting for an hour or longer. So it's really great to hear that you've been able to put these pieces together and learn to cook and have it really culminate in some great experiences for you. So we're just so happy to hear that. Next question is here from Barbara. Hello, Chef Ken. I look forward to class every week. Thank you, Barbara. I don't have a specific question, but want you to know that continuing to learn is wonderful. Thank you for this. I'm almost 72 years old and plan on being on the planet many more years. Well, Barbara, thank you. I so appreciate the fact that you have committed yourself to continual learning and to improving yourself. And even though you've probably learned a ton of things in your almost 72 years, that you're not done yet. So that is incredibly encouraging for me. And I think something that everyone should hear. That's a message that I think should carry to all corners, is that, regardless of your age, your level of ability, that all of us can take on new things, learn new things, and derive, satisfaction, to get some joy from those things. That's just great. Jill says, is it okay to cool baking sheets on top of the stove? Yeah, Jill, 100%. You can cool baking sheets on top of your stove. If your stove was previously on and that's why your baking sheets were hot, it's probably not the coolest place in your kitchen. So if you have a baking rack or another place to cool, that might cool off faster. But from a safety point of view or a practical point of view, there's nothing wrong at all with cooling those baking sheets on top of your stove. We have a lot of veggies bits from practicing chopping. What do we do with them? Oh, Ethan. So, some of the things I mentioned on today's live event already in terms of, par cooking or blanching or adding them to some product, storing them for later use. Those are all going to be things that I can suggest. Certainly, our courses require you to do a lot of prep, a lot of practice, a lot of cooking. All those things are going to increase your overall, kind of food load at your house. So finding ways to distribute that food. It might be a neighbor or a coworker in need. It might be finding a creative way to add those to a stock or a soup. Find a way to use them without making it a point of waste, I guess. Sometimes it takes creativity, but I found all kinds of ways, in particular by leveraging what's in the freezer with using some of those things. Hi, Chef. My question, if I don't have a shallot, can I use red onions? Yes, 100%. Not going to be exactly the same, but be very, very close. Brenda, or this is from Vanessa to Brenda. Nutritionist told me years ago to retrain my palate by eating veggies raw, individually teaching the palate to like them as they are, and then mixing those to create a variety to your palate. Then you can reduce your meat portions. So that's a great suggestion, Vanessa, of maybe a way to step into appreciating, enjoying more different types of vegetables. I think that's probably a major hurdle for people, is calibrating your senses, learning about yourself. What do I like versus what does the media say I should like? What if you don't like kale? What if you don't like Brussels sprouts? That's fine. There's lots of other things to eat, so you shouldn't feel like you're compelled to like some food just because other people like it. But certainly, to this point here from Vanessa, taste these things. See how they taste on their own. See how they taste together. That's the only way you're truly going to develop that appreciation. Next question. Hi, Chef. I'm really enjoying the course and I have learned so much. Excited to learn and know more. I wanted to know how I can control my anger and have more patience when something I cook does not come out the way I want. You know, it's a really important question and one that I think speaks to a way of cooking that I've been trying to promote for a long time, which is this idea that every time you cook, every meal is a new opportunity, and that regardless of what happens, it goes great, doesn't go well, it's overcooked, it's undercooked, you add the wrong spice or you add the spice at the wrong time. Every time you cook is an opportunity to do it differently. It's a new chapter. So when you think about a dish that you made, it didn't come out the way you wanted, just take comfort knowing that it was something that didn't take you too long to make. Maybe it took you 30 minutes or an hour. It wasn't like you carved a monument or built a statue or made a masterpiece that turned out horribly and there was a year of your life gone. It was just an afternoon or just an hour, and that's fine. And that the next time you do it, you can learn and you can do it better. You can make it differently. You can make it to your palate more. And the lovely thing is that you're going to be hungry in a few hours anyway. So it's not like you have to wait very long to give it another shot. You'll have that opportunity quickly. And I just think, people maybe shouldn't take it so seriously sometimes. You can relax. And there's, lots of other things to eat. So it's always a matter of maybe taking a step back and just remembering that it's just a meal and that, you can alter it, revise your plan, do it differently for the next time. Nothing permanent about that. Next question here, actually last question I should say, is canning considered over-processing veg? I have never heard it mentioned when overabundance in the garden. There are only 2 of us and we'll never eat all is produced starting a new garden for winter and wondering. I would say that, depending on how you're canning and depending on what you're doing, it's an absolutely great way to process your vegetables. So if you've got a garden full of great produce, if you want to do pressure canning, if you want to do fermentation, which involves, lacto-fermentation with water and salt, that's a great way to preserve vegetables. You can also freeze. You can also do quick pickling. You can also can and then refrigerate. There's a whole variety of things that you can do that will essentially allow you to keep that product very intact or minimally processed and still retain a lot of the nutrition, a lot of those great qualities. So 100%, this is the way people used to have to live because there wasn't a supermarket and you canned the food or you froze the food or you dehydrated or pickled all the things that came out of the garden during the height of the season. And that's what gave you the ability to get through the winter and the beginning of spring into the next year. So I think it makes great sense. Well, that does it for all of our questions today. Really, really great questions. Always wanted to just remark on the diversity of questions and the range of needs of our students, the different things that people are out there thinking of. So thank you for that. And if there was a question I didn't get to or didn't get to answer fully, of course, do reach out to us at support@ruby.com. So until next time, we look forward to seeing you in class, and happy cooking. Take care.